Welcome to the study session meeting for the Planning and Zoning Commission for Monday, January 25th, 2021. As usual, I'd like to thank all the commissioners for your time tonight. Just to mix things up, we're not having a regular meeting tonight, we're just having the study session. And so because we're voting on a couple of things, we're going to open with citizen comments, which allows citizens to comment on anything that's not on the agenda. So let me read that. Item B, citizen comments. This agenda item provides an opportunity for citizens to address the Planning and Zoning Commission on any matter that is not posted on the agenda. Anyone wishing to address the Commission should complete a citizen comments registration form and submit it to the chairman prior to the start of the meeting. There's a 3-minute time limit for each citizen to speak, with a reasonable limitation on speakers on one topic or item, with a maximum of 15 total minutes on the same topic item. Anyone wishing to speak shall be courteous and cordial. Planning and Zoning Commission is not permitted to take action on any subject raised by a speaker during citizen comments. However, the Planning and Zoning Commission may have the item placed on a future agenda for action, refer the item to the Director of Planning for further study or action, briefly state existing city policy, or provide a brief statement of factual information in response to the inquiry. We have no one here in the audience. Do we have anyone online that wishes to speak during the citizen comment section? We do not have anyone online? Awesome. So now we will move on to item A1. Welcome, Planning and Zoning Commissioner Amber Rayleigh. Welcome. So the way we usually do this is we go around and do a brief introduction of ourselves. I can start. So I've been on the Planning and Zoning Commission, I guess, almost 5 years. So next year is the end, 2022 is the end of my 2 terms. I think I'm the most senior person. Maybe Bertle's been on a little longer than me. Or okay. When I joined, there actually were people on the commission who had been here 11 to 15 years. So part of the city council's policy was to set in the term limits and, bring in new people and such. So anyway, it happens fast. And I've been a citizen of Farmers Branch most of my life. There's been a few years where I moved away and then repented and came back. So we raised all our kids here, and I have been a consultant for the last few years, and I'm the executive director at the Firehouse Theater. So we'll go with Bertle, and then we'll kind of go in your direction.
I am Linda Bertle. I have lived in Farmers Branch for 39 years and raised my children here, live in my third house. I retired from everything but this and serving the city of Farmers Branch. I sit in the COP when they're working. They've been off for a while. So this is my 4th year. I think G and I came on about the same time. And I love this position. So welcome. Glad you're here.
Giovanni.
Hi, I'm Giovanni Zavala. I was born and raised here, so went through the CFPID school system, went to college, came back. I work in construction, and like Linda said, we both came on at the same time, which I guess is 4 years now. It seems, wow, it's a long time. Time flies by, I guess. So welcome. Nice having you as part of the commission.
Bonnie Petraza.
Hi, I am Bonnie Petraza. I have lived in Farmers Branch for 9 years now. I grew up in Carrollton. I've completed almost 2 years on P&Z. I started off as an alternate, and I think before my first year was up, was moved on to the board. So it does go fast. I am a stay-at-home parent, and I've got 2 kids that are in Carrollton Farmers Branch schools, and I am sort of representing that contingency here, if you will. Welcome.
Yeah, in fact, all 4 on the screen, Bonnie, Pat, Barrett, and Andy, started as alternates. So, Pat.
Pat Byrne. I've been a resident of Farmers Branch almost 3 years. I am an alternate, and I was the junior alternate until you came along. So thank you. But been on the commission since July, and so I work for the Dallas Cowboys, and my wife and I are happy living here. We live right across from the Station District, and we're really looking forward to things opening over there. We like walking around. So, but Farmers Branch is great. Welcome. Look forward to working with you.
Barrett?
As was mentioned, similar background to Bonnie. So started as an alternate and been on P&Z for almost 2 years now. Been a Farmers Branch resident. I'm just trying to calculate in my head, I think 6 or 7 years. And I work at a large regional chamber of commerce. But we're really glad you're here. Welcome.
Andy Jones.
As was mentioned previously, I was alternate one up until recently, as of like 3 weeks ago. I have lived in Farmers Branch only about a year, a little over, but my wife and I brought a new child into the world in August, and our daughter is 2 years old. So our daughter and son live here. We're looking forward to raising our family. We live over in Mercer Crossing, and we're looking forward to putting down roots. I'm a personal injury trial lawyer. I work in Dallas, but I do work all over, and I'm really excited to be a part of the commission and looking forward to getting to know you when the plague has lifted in person.
And Amber, now you get to go.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the warm welcome, and my background is actually academically in urban planning and public policy, so I'm very excited to be here. And I work at Dallas College, and my family and I have only lived in Farmers Branch since this summer, but we moved here with some intentionality, and we really enjoy being here. We're near the Brookhaven Golf Course.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Item A2, consider approval of the attendance matrix for the Planning and Zoning Commission as presented and take appropriate action. Has everyone had a chance to look at the attendance matrix as stated in the City of Farmers Branch Ethics Handbook for elected officials and advisory board members? All appointed members should make every effort to attend regularly scheduled meetings. Per ordinance number 3563 adopted April 2nd, 2019, any person appointed by the City Council to a board or commission as either a regular member or alternate member shall be automatically considered for removal by the City Council after such person has been absent from 2 regular or special meetings of the board or commission to which the person is appointed during any period of 12 consecutive months, which absences have not been excused by an affirmative vote of the board or commission to which the person is appointed. A comprehensive attendance matrix has been developed to keep record of these excused and unexcused absences. Looks like everyone was here, so if no one has an issue with that, I will entertain a motion.
I move that we accept the attendance matrix as presented.
I have a motion from Commissioner Brittle.
Second.
I'll second that.
Second from Commissioner Zavala. All in favor? It is unanimous. Item A3, consider approval of the January 11th, 2021 Planning and Zoning Commission minutes and take appropriate action. Staff recommends approval of the minutes of the January 11th, 2021 meeting. Any comments, questions, misspelled words or names? Everyone seems to be good. All right, I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we accept the minutes as presented.
I have a motion from Commissioner Brittle. Second.
Second.
Second from Commissioner Zavala. All in favor? It is unanimous. Item A4, discussion and direction regarding potential amendments to the comprehensive zoning ordinance related to accessory dwelling units. Ms. Paz.
Thank you. You take caught on my earring here. Mask dilemmas. All right. Good evening, Chairman, Commission. This evening, I'm going to present an overview on the discussion we had with City Council earlier, I guess, in March, right before the whole COVID situation happened. So As with everything, COVID has added delays to this item. However, we are now ready to discuss it, and we're bringing forward to the Planning and Zoning Commission for your input. I want to start with what a accessory dwelling unit is. The American Planning Association defines an accessory dwelling unit, or most commonly referred to as ADU, as a smaller independent residential dwelling unit located on the same lot as a standalone single-family home. Many times we hear it known as a garage apartment, a guest house, an in-law suite, a granny flat. Those are all terms that are referring to an accessory dwelling unit. In Farmers Branch, our comprehensive zoning ordinance refers to ADUs as guest servants' quarters. So some of you may be, oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, thank you. I do this every time. Sorry. Thank you. Sorry. Okay. Here we go. All right. Now we should, yes, thank you. Okay, as I was saying, now I have to readjust here. Okay, so as I was mentioning, our comprehensive zoning ordinance refers to it as guest servants' quarters. It refers to ADUs as guest servants' quarters. Some of you may have seen requests for accessory or guest servants' quarters through a specific use permit request. We haven't had many requests recently. I know in my tenure with the city, almost 3 years now, I think I've seen maybe 2 or 3 before the commission. So we don't see them quite often. However, we do in our suite, we do get a lot of inquiries on accessory dwelling units, and I'm going to cover what our current standards are. So some other information I think it's important for the commission to know, and information that was also presented to our city council, is the AARP's position on ADUs. AARP published ABCs of ADU. For those of you that are interested, you can go to their website. I think it's aarp.com/livable. You can actually download this guidebook that they provided, and it's quite interesting and provides a lot of insight as to what are ADUs and how ADUs can address housing options for all ages, including those of ages 50 and up. The AARP actually did a survey of people who are 50 and plus, and asked what their thoughts were on ADUs. And from that survey, what they found is that people that are 50 plus want ADUs as a housing option because it provides homes for loved ones. It provides a housing for relatives or friends that may be visiting them. It's a safe place for someone to live by them, for someone they know to live nearby them, space for guests such as a guest house. It increases property values. It provides a space for a caregiver if they need one. And it also is a way to earn extra income if it's a rentable ADU. So again, this information came from the guidebook on the AARP's website. And I think it was important to make note of that, given the discussion we have oftentimes regarding the need for housing options. And this is one way we can potentially provide a different housing option here in Farmers Branch, is through allowing ADUs or having ADUs. So there are different types of ADUs. As you can see on this diagram here, you can have detached, I'm starting from the top, kind of going this way. You can have a detached ADU, which is standalone, separate from the primary residence or the single family home. It can be attached. It can be interior to the home. These are different ways of attached. It can be interior to the home, as you see here, either through a basement or an upper level unit, like you see here in an attic, a lower level, a basement, as I mentioned. And then there's also the garage conversion, where you have it above a garage, or maybe a potential storage space above the garage that's converted into an ADU. Those are different types of accessory dwelling units that are seen throughout the nation. But generally, ADUs are intended to be subordinate in size to the primary home, in scale and in size. They're accessed separately from the main home, but can sometimes have a shared entry. And they're also intended to fit discreetly into the built environment. So they're not intended to be the primary character when you look at the property from a street view. So now I want to cover our current standards as it relates to accessory dwelling units. As I mentioned, we refer to them as guest servants' quarter in the Code of Ordinance, and they're defined as an accessory building designed and used for the temporary housing of immediate family members, personal guests, or housing of full-time domestic service worker. There are provisions associated to accessory dwelling units. As I mentioned, the Commission may have seen a request for a guest servants' quarter through an SUP request, and that is due to currently the CZO only allows guest and servants' quarters in R1 and R2 zoning districts with the approval of an SUP. Currently, only a guest servants' quarter can only be occupied by families, by the owner's or tenant's family, guest, or domestic servant. There's minimum standards in the building code and a minimum housing code for habitable space, which is a minimum of 70 square feet for rooms within an accessory dwelling unit. Also, accessory dwelling unit, guest servants' quarters, I should say, can be attached or detached, and there's different provisions if it's attached or detached. And those are just based on it's the guest servants' quarter proximity to the single family home. So as I mentioned, City Council requested of staff to make a presentation on accessory dwelling units. And on March 3rd, 2020, staff made a presentation regarding accessory dwelling units. And we also covered our current development standards for accessory or guest servants' quarters. And we also covered City of Plano's accessory dwelling units. And in Plano, they refer to them as backyard cottages. So on March 3rd, staff made a presentation and we received feedback from council. I won't go into great detail on the City of Plano's ordinance. I did in the staff report, I did provide a brief summary, and I want to just point out some takeaways from the City of Plano's ordinance that were unique, and that is that the City of Plano's ADU ordinance allows for ADUs or the backyard cottage to be rented. However, the property owner has to occupy either the main home on the property or the ADU. And the city ordinance also requires that the property owner file covenants on the property that restrict or that require the property owner to occupy the property, again, either the main residence or the accessory dwelling unit. And it also restricts a backyard cottage from being sold separately. But in general, the City of Plano's ordinance allows ADUs in most of their residential zoning districts. It does exclude some of the larger zoning districts, such as agricultural districts. And it does also provide for minimum development standards on how those ADUs can be developed, such as requiring minimum number of parking, access to the ADU, driveways, and minimum lot size, minimum floor area, minimum lot coverage, and maximum floor area as well. So again, just wanted to quickly do an overview of the Plano's ordinance. Didn't want to go into too much detail. From that city council meeting we had on March 3rd, some of the takeaway that staff took and direction that we received from the council was to remove the SUP provisions from the guest servants' quarter and allow ADUs in all residential zoning districts with one family residential dwelling units. Also providing by amending our current ADU ordinance, it would provide a housing option for elderly family members in need, however, not being a rental option. And this request, in this bullet point here, is important to note that we staff have received requests in other zoning districts other than R1 and R2 for accessory dwelling units. However, under our current guidelines, current ordinance, guest servants' quarters are not allowed, except, as I mentioned, in R1 or R2 with a specific use permit. So we have had to tell property owners that an accessory dwelling unit is not allowed. And in many cases, it has been for a family member or an aging parent that wants to occupy that accessory dwelling unit. So I do want to point that out. Council also expressed concerns with parking, ensuring that if we do go down the route of amending the guest servants quarter ordinance, that we require minimum parking specifically for that accessory dwelling unit, and also setting minimum size requirements and certain amenities be provided within that accessory dwelling unit. Specifically, they mentioned having a bathroom and running water and sewer available to that unit. Again, to ensure that it's being properly served and the amenities are being provided within that dwelling. Also, council expressed concerns with quality of construction and minimum architectural standards. So council specifically mentioned requiring that accessory dwelling units be on a foundation, and that the architectural standard of the accessory dwelling unit be in line with the main residence, which would be the single family dwelling unit. So based on that direction that we received, I've been working on a draft ordinance. I don't have that I didn't provide a draft ordinance to you yet. We're still working on formulating that. However, we have worked on kind of an outline of what that amendment could look like. And again, based on the feedback that we received from City Council, the first item that I want to address is the renaming of guest servants' quarters. Although ADUs have historically been used for domestic employees, it's not common practice anymore. The average citizen doesn't use them for employees or domestic workers that work in their home. So my first recommendation is to rename it to accessory dwelling units, so that way it's more inclusive as to the use itself. We are proposing to retain the occupancy just to the owner or lessee's immediate family member, personal guest, or full-time domestic service worker, or family of that full-time domestic service worker. And the reason why I'm proposing to leave the domestic service worker provision in there is there are cases where that may be an option. I realize that not the average citizen will have that, but there could be the case where that may be an option for some families or some residents. The other provision that we're proposing is to ensure that the ADU is not rented independently from the main structure. So we realize that currently single-family residential dwelling units are allowed to be rented through our rental registration process, and there are provisions in our code of ordinance for that. However, we want to ensure that accessory dwelling unit is not rented separately from the single-family home. So you don't have basically two dwelling units that are being rented separately. However, it's possible as we're currently drafting it, it's possible that if the single-family dwelling unit is being leased, that whoever is occupying that main residence or the single-family home could have access to that accessory dwelling unit and have either a family member or guest occupy that space as well, or their family occupy that space as well. And the biggest change I would say that we're proposing is to allow an ADU per lot on the same lot as a use, or as a lot that's being used and allows for a one-family dwelling unit detached. Again, so that's a one-family dwelling detached, allow one ADU per lot. So you would have one single-family home and one ADU, no more than that. So the question that I would pose to the commission is, should ADUs be allowed only in one family dwelling, and only on one family dwelling lots? Or should it be opened up to all residential zoning districts, such as duplex zoning districts and multifamily districts, where currently our zoning ordinance allows for one family dwelling detached units. However, it's not, the zoning district itself also allows for duplex and multifamily. So that's one question that I would pose to the commission is should we open it up to all residential zoning districts where you could have one family dwelling units detached, or should it just be exclusive to R1 through R6, where it's typically you find your one family residential detached structures? Lastly, I want to cover just some development standards that we're looking at as far as providing as part of the accessory dwelling unit ordinance. The first one would be, again, in order to preserve the character of the neighborhood and ensure that the main residence is the view from the view from the street, is requiring that the accessory dwelling unit be located on the rear or behind the main structure. Also, regulating the height of an accessory dwelling unit so that it doesn't exceed the height of the main structure, so you don't have an ADU that's towering over a one-story ranch-style single-family home. Also, having a minimum floor area and lot coverage of 400 square feet. So what this would do is ensure that if the minimum is 400 square feet, then that 400 square feet is a one unit, and you don't have 400 square feet where you have 200 square feet on the first floor and 200 square feet on the top floor. But it's on one single story, if you will. And then also proposing a maximum of 1,100 square feet, however, setting a no more than 50% of the main structure, whichever is less. So that 1,100 square feet actually comes from the R1 zoning district. The R1 zoning district requires that the main structure be at least 2,200 square feet. Half of that is 1,100, so that's how that number came to be. The 400 square feet actually came from the one-bedroom minimum floor area required for multifamily. So it's half of that. So the minimum is 800 and 400 being half. So that's how I came up with those two numbers, in case you're wondering where those numbers came from. Also, with the ADU requiring that a full bathroom be provided, meaning a toilet, sink, a tub, or a shower be provided with each dwelling unit, and also to ensure that we don't have a parking issue where you have multiple cars parked on the street, is requiring one parking space, additional space of off-street parking on the property. So in addition to the parking that's required for the single family, requiring one parking for the accessory dwelling unit. And then as it relates to access, also providing provisions that would require that the driveway be shared with the main structure, so you don't have multiple driveways coming off one street or multiple access coming off, onto the lot. So with that, I'll close and open it up for any questions. I know Commissioner Rayleigh, you had some questions about the short-term rental ordinance, so I'm happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Thank you, Jennifer. Can you, do you have handy the map that shows the R1, R2, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, 1,
I think
all those?
I do not have that available. I could pull up a zoning map. That could help. So, oh gosh, let's see here. Sorry, I don't want to make you dizzy here. So the yellow shaded areas are your residential, one-family residential districts. Most of the R1s, so this area here, it's difficult to see, I apologize, but Brookhaven, I guess I should say west of Marsh, between north of Valley View, here, all of this is one-family residential District 2. And then R1s, I think we have a few. I'm trying to remember where. Thank you. Here. So this area here on the southeast corner of Valley View and Webb Chapel is one-family residence District 1.
So basically, just to help everyone understand, the R1s, R2s, et cetera, have to do with the size of the lot?
I imagine that's where that provision came to be, is that these lots are the larger lots, or you have a larger minimum lot size required. Correct.
Okay. If we were in the study session room, we'd have that big map on the wall and it would all be up there for us. But, okay. Second question on the nomenclature.
Okay.
An accessory structure is a building where people don't live. It's a lawn house. It's a patio that's covered that has a fire pit in it, as compared to an accessory dwelling unit, which is a accessory structure where people live that has a bathroom. Is that right?
So an accessory dwelling unit is an accessory structure.
Okay.
However, it's also an accessory use. So, and you're correct, an accessory building can be a storage shed, it can be a pergola or a covered area on a covered structure that covers your backyard. Those are considered accessory buildings. However, an accessory dwelling unit is a structure, so it's an accessory building as well, and it's an accessory use. So, yes, it is considered an accessory building.
Is that the reason you came up with accessory dwelling unit, or is it because that's what ARP calls it? Or I'm wondering why we chose that instead of the words that Plano uses or whatever.
So it's a very common term, I guess, in the planning community and also in the home building community, I would say. So it's a common term. There are communities that use different terms that mean accessory dwelling unit. Like I mentioned, Plano, they call theirs backyard cottage. I know City of Dallas calls theirs accessory dwelling unit, but it's just a common term.
Okay. Do you foresee, Commissioner Zavala has a accessory structure in his backyard, does not have running water, but he is wanting to convert it to an accessory dwelling unit. Do you foresee that might happen at some point in time?
It could, as far as there is potential for accessory buildings to be converted into accessory dwelling units. However, there would be a permitting process in order to do such a thing, and would require that water and sewer connection to be provided.
Cool. All right. And then, is there a limit to a number of people that can live in a accessory dwelling unit?
So currently, the way our guest servants quarters ordinance is written, it limits it to family members, guest, or a domestic service worker. Now, what really is going to limit how many people are within the dwelling unit is going to be based on the size in our the housing code. But currently it's not explicit. There shall only be one person within an accessory dwelling unit. It limits the occupants, but not the number of occupants.
So right now, forget about accessory dwelling units in a home. The way as a citizen that I might be suspect that there's too many people living in a house is if there's 15 cars there and there's only 4 places to park and there's a whole lot of activity going on. And so then I call whoever I call and I report that, this house might have too many people in it. Is there a way that this would be monitored in the same
It would be the same process, if you will. It would still go through code enforcement. They would have to investigate to see, okay, how many folks are living in the home and determine, okay, based on the size of the home, 1, is the number of occupants being exceeded, and 2, are the folks within the residence or staying in the residence related as it's defined in the code of ordinance as for family.
And then my final question, you mentioned on a foundation, is there going to be a description? Is that a concrete foundation or pier and beam, or is there a description of what a foundation is?
Currently the accessory buildings provisions, which includes our guest servants' quarters, requires that accessory buildings over, I believe it's 200 square feet, be on a foundation. I believe it says concrete foundation. I don't believe it specifies slab versus pier and beam.
Okay, the reason I ask is because I think in our accessory structures, we talk about a concrete pad.
Yes.
And then you can take a portable building and just slap it on top of the pad, or a mobile home. So I guess that would be, if I had a mobile home and I put it on a concrete pad, is that a foundation?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I think part of it would be how it's set on the slab itself. In my limited knowledge on accessory or on portable buildings, which are prefabricated and may have, don't have a foundation, they have to be strapped down to the slab itself. And I believe that's regulated through our building code as far as how that's strapped down for certain wind speeds. But specifically, how it's tied down, I don't know the answer to that. Okay. Now, as far as the type of structure itself, that was one of the concerns the City Council expressed is, the type of structure it is. Is it prefabricated? Is it something that's going to complement the main structure? So that's where the architectural provisions came to play is, okay, how do we ensure that the accessory dwelling unit is compatible with the main structure? That is challenging for staff given changes in state law where we're not able to regulate building material. There are other ways in which that can be regulated, and we do that currently through the roof line, the pitch of the roof, and also given that the building materials is now we're not able to regulate that. That's where there's more. I guess conflicting views is that, and we can't regulate building materials itself, but there are certain things that we can regulate, whether the roof pitch or, the architectural style complements or is compatible with the main structure.
Okay.
Jennifer, if I could add, so we would rely upon trying to use any provisions within the existing building code to be able to help regulate these type of structures. So your question about, what is the foundation? Is that pier and beam or slab? That we would rely upon what options are available under the building code to be able to address that.
I assume the same thing with mobile homes. Mobile homes aren't allowed just on any particular piece of property. There's certain places where those can go.
Well, under the construction type, I believe they're classified as manufactured structures or manufactured housing. If it meets the requirements of building code, then it may be already allowed, especially now given the fact that we're not able to enforce certain masonry requirements or other building construction code requirements. So again, we'd have to, we'd evaluate the structure to see, does it comply with the building code requirements, particularly that have been adopted within the last 3 code cycles. And then if there are any additional construction requirements that come into play as a result of siting that type of structure on the property, then we would have to ensure compliance with that. But that would all predominantly, most likely be reviewed through the building permitting process for code compliance.
Super. And then finally, I guess my thought is we should only allow this on one-family dwelling lots in D1 and D2 and not multifamily lots. To me, we should phase those in. That's my first thought. And now I move to Commissioner Zavala.
Yeah, that was.
David, if I could, I was going to say, if you don't mind, let me jump in real quick, because I know Jennifer was trying to explain this, and so keep in mind, we have our standard single-family residential zoning districts that are one-family districts, the R1 through R6. We also have duplex zoning districts that are the D1s and the D2s, and then we have the multiple family zoning districts, which are the MF1 through MF4. The point that Jennifer was trying to make is that in a D1, D2, and MF1 through 4 zoning districts, the zoning ordinance actually allows a single-family detached structure. So the question is, if we have lots that have a single-family detached structure on them, and they happen to be located in a D1 or D2 or an MF1 through 4 zoning district, do we want to allow that single-family lot to have that opportunity also to have an accessory dwelling unit? Because right now, the direction that we got from council, and keep in mind, when we had this conversation with council, we did not get into this level of the details and weeds, if you will. It was more of a high-level conversation. But I think the thinking was generally that we would allow them in the R1 through R6 zoning district. But as Jennifer's done a great job of analyzing that zoning ordinance, we realized that, hey, these other zoning districts technically allow a one-family residence or a single-family residence. So hence the question, if we've got a single-family residential lot that has one detached house on it, and it happens to be zone MF2, do we want to go ahead and allow for that type of lot to take advantage of having an accessory dwelling unit?
And I guess my feeling is no, because I think the spirit is we want to allow people to be able to take care of their family members or friends, or if they want to rent out one apartment. But if you're already in a multifamily and now you're renting out another separate multifamily, that seems to bleed over to our next topic, which is multifamily, in my mind.
Well, I guess I would think that the case you just described would be in a scenario where we're looking to increase density, right? I mean, the zoning may have just recently changed to provide, or is there an example where we have multifamily zoning and we still have single-family residences in there that do not have long-term plans of that type of density growth?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that the goal was to add density. My takeaway from city council was just a housing option for family members and expanding it for other zoning districts. Now, do we have single-family dwelling units on multifamily lots? I don't believe so. I haven't done a full analysis on all the properties to determine if there is one.
I guess I misunderstood what you just said, Tina. I took it as like you were suggesting that instances where we have single-family lots or residents, but they're in a multifamily district.
Right.
So
currently, our current comprehensive zoning ordinance allows for a single-family detached home in duplex 1, duplex 2, MF1 through MF4 zoning districts. Do we currently have single-family in those districts? I don't believe so, but I can't confirm that. However, it is an allowed use.
Okay.
So the question is, if single-family detached is an allowed use in all residential zoning districts, should the accessory dwelling units also be allowed in all zoning districts that allow for a single-family detached?
Okay, I see. I mean, I agree with David with his last point, what he was saying as well. That's kind of was going to be my feedback on the whole situation or this proposal. The other thing too is just confirming. I feel like I know the answer to this, but they still have to adhere to all the setback requirements and everything like that as well, right?
Yeah. So the accessory building section has provisions on setbacks, and we actually just amended that recently. Now, if the commission feels that the accessory dwelling unit should have different setbacks, then that's something we can discuss. But it would have to comply with all of the setback provisions within the Code of Ordinance, yes.
So right now, it would fall under the I guess, accessory building setback requirements.
Correct.
Okay.
Unless otherwise stated, which I don't believe it makes exceptions for accessory dwelling units, or currently we call them guest servants' quarters. But you're correct, yes.
And I guess, and forgive me if you mentioned this, but did you say that these are just strictly intended to be for like family members or I guess staff of the residents? They're not rental units. That's not the intent, correct?
Correct. The direction that we got from City Council was that they would not become rental housing options. It would be for, again, family members, guests, or I don't even know what to call them. What did I call? I think they call them guests, or the employee of the home that could occupy that accessory dwelling unit. Or if it's a leased, if the single family home is leased, then the same would apply. It would be their family member, guest, or domestic service worker.
Okay. Thank you.
Can you also remind us, because we haven't talked about accessory structures enough, what is the limit on the number that can be on a piece of property? Is it 2, or is there no limit?
There's no specific limit as far as number of occupants.
No, not number of occupants, but number of structures.
I'm sorry. The single family detached, the single family detached would be one structure. And then I suppose if you had a guest servants quarters, that would be potentially another structure. It could also be attached to the main residence. Depending on which zoning district you're in, there are minimum or maximum lot coverages, minimum lot or floor area for the single family home. So there are certain provisions that dictate what that would look like. But so it would be one single family home and then one guest service.
So if I currently own a 50-year-old Farmers Branch single-family home, and there's a lawn house, a detached accessory structure on that, can I add a dwelling unit?
So that would be determined by the lot coverage, and also there's a provision in the CZO that regulates how much of the rear half of the lot can be covered by structure.
Okay,
so
okay.
yes.
Commissioner Brittle.
Woo. So a lot of the questions have been answered. I think everybody's had the same thing. So let's talk about, I worked on the census and I worked in Farmers Branch. I know all over this city there are people living in homes, rental homes, and they're rented out by bedroom. And there are a huge number of people that overturn in that house. And it's not owned, the owner does not live there. You cannot contact the owner, seems like. My concern would be that if we're allowing a home, a residence to be leased, and then they build an accessory building and that can be leased, we're just upping that amount of rental. Or you said the person leasing the house can then, their family members can live in there. So when I've asked this question many times, how do you maintain compliance that it is a family member or a whatever, or let's say it's someone that works for you, you're allowing them there? To me, that would you can fill that residence up with people that want to be there on a day-by-day basis. I think it would be, my concern is that you need to have some way to comply, because I've been told you can't go in the house and check. I'm sorry. Once they're in there, and they can run them in and out as many as they want, and they've got 10 cars on the street with a home that's 1,500 square feet. So my concern is being able to comply with these. Now, I think it is a good idea. I like all of this. The parking of one parking place is probably not going to be enough if you can get, if there's no limit to the number of people that can be in there. And I think the limit on a home actually is the number of adults that can live in the home is the sizes of the bedrooms. And so many adults can live in so much bedroom and whatever. Do we comply with that? And do we have a way to check it? Absolutely not. So compliance is one thing, so I think that we need to write fairly strict, this is the rule, and then I don't know how you're going to make it for compliance. I do not think multifamily should be able to build. And the duplex, my question is, if you have a duplex, then you're going to build another for lease home in back, or how do you know even who's in that? Because you're leasing out one side of your duplex, you're probably not living in it, or that may be a family member living there. I don't know. So I'm still at odds with duplexes, and then minimum number of residents in there, minimum vehicles, worker of the, so I've asked all my questions, so.
Let me ask a clarification. Are you suggesting limiting the number of occupants within an accessory dwelling unit? Is that correct?
Well, if you only have the 600 square feet, that's the size of a garage, and you got a bathroom. And so that way, so you can only build on so much of that inside, right? So I don't think it's a bad idea to limit the number of residents that live in an outside structure. You only have one place for one car.
Okay.
And again, you know that there is a problem in Farmers Branch with people parking on the street because they have, every single person has a car these days, and then every child has a car, and then whatever else. So I've heard this many, 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 many times. How can we limit the number of cars that park on the street? They won't park in their garage, driveways. They build in their garages, and they don't build another a garage, which we know happens, and that's against the law in Farmers Branch. So I'm just saying compliance is a biggie here for me. Enough said. I'll turn off.
So I just want to add a clarification to your comment. So when I mentioned duplex and multifamily zoning districts, the way we're suggesting to this proposed ordinance is not an ADU with a multifamily unit or with a duplex. What I'm saying is that the D1, D2, MF1 through MF4 zoning districts allow single-family detached homes. Those zoning districts allow for them. There are certain provisions that have to meet, certain lot sizes. So if we currently, I'm not sure we currently do, but if in the event that a property that is zoned duplex or multifamily is developed for single-family use, is an accessory dwelling unit acceptable in those zoning districts?
Could we not regulate that by making it where you have to have an SUP? If you're in a D1, D2, MF1 through 4, you have to go through the SUP process, and then it's a one-on-one. So we're giving the masses, as Tina said, the single family. We're following the spirit of the law, but we're still regulating in the true Farmers Branch fashion through SUPs. Those rare instances, we think they're rare, where the land is a D1, but there's a single family house on it, and now I want to add a dwelling, accessory dwelling unit. Oh, to do that, I've got to go through the SUP process?
That is possible. I mean, it can be regulated that way. I guess my question to you would be, the differences, because like I said, if a single family law is developed in duplex or multifamily, they have similar guidelines as to single family dwelling units that are on R1 or through R6 districts. So, I guess that would be my question is, because.
So I think I would want to see a map.
Okay.
And go through those. And I feel like that's where Geo and Bertle are as well.
I was going to say, let's just do some additional analysis on
okay.
that to be able to give you a better picture of that.
If it's 2 areas, it's not worth the issue. But if it's 40 different places that could happen, then it might be worth it. All right.
Right. We can do some more homework on that.
Thank you. Commissioner Raley.
Great, thank you. So my question that I sent before, which I will bring up here because I think it's relevant and may address some of the other questions, is around ordinance number 3475, which amended Chapter 26 approved by the City Council on the 12th of August 2019 around short-term rental policies. And if you could give us just a brief primer on that policy and how it would be applicable in these situations, considering the language around guest.
So thank you for the question. So in anticipation of this question, I actually reached out to our city attorney for their input. And what I suspected is true. We would need to potentially do some cleanup in the short-term rental ordinance in order to either specifically exclude accessory dwelling units as a short-term rental option, or if the direction is to allow them as short-term rental, then that would need to be cleaned up in that short-term rental ordinance. Currently, the way it reads, it's not explicit. It doesn't mention accessory dwelling units, and it does speak to one family detached being allowed at short-term rental, so long as you go through the registration and meet all those specific guidelines. However, accessory dwelling units is not mentioned. So that would be something we would need to look at if we move forward with this amendment.
I appreciate that. I think a follow-up in looking at it, I'm curious as to the requirement around family or employer. One of the things that I know about accessory dwelling units is they're also often called Fonzie flats, because the Fonz lived in the garage upstairs apartment of the Cunninghams, paid $50 a month in 1950 to do so, and that was an additional income that provided the Cunninghams an ability to hedge against the potential closure of their hardware store. So for me, I'm curious about, and it was also in the ARP that you mentioned, their research, which I also read, which specifies the additional income for seniors or housing for a caregiver as important uses for these accessory dwelling units. So I'm curious about that, and if the spirit perhaps of that intent could be better addressed in the short-term rental policy, while allowing for actually a greater number of uses. And I'll just say, from a personal standpoint, I myself, as a graduate student in Houston, rented an accessory dwelling unit. And it was a place I could afford as a grad student. I was a single person. And at the time, I didn't actually own a car. So it was a great option for me. So just a thought on that.
So to make sure I understood, you're suggesting that the rental aspect of an ADU be addressed through the short-term rental ordinance. Is that correct?
Yes, providing potentially opportunity for rental if, in fact, it is a long-term rental option, and therefore would also address the need. What we know about retrofitting suburbia is that the need for housing is predominantly from 1 or 2 person households. That's the increasing need for housing, this missing middle. And it seems as though the accessory dwelling unit could provide a stable option for 1 or 2 household members that would provide wonderful residents like grad students or elderly folks, as it mentions here. Or the Fonz.
Yeah. So so currently the guest servants quarter allows for certain occupancy, whether it's family member or a bona fide servant or domestic service worker. So those are allowed. However, I think, just to make sure I understand you, it's the rental component that you're interested in.
Yes. So if Harry Winkler wanted to rent my accessory dwelling unit and is not related to me, but I think that would be a good long-term tenant,
Yeah.
I would like to do so.
And that does raise a question on affordable housing, just so we can tie 3 or 4 different subjects together. Would the person who lives in the accessory dwelling unit who's renting it, would that count toward affordable housing or not? I don't know. I just think you guys.
It's truly possible. And in some communities, I mean, as Jennifer pointed out earlier, that's why they've allowed for the accessory dwelling units to be rented. Is it because it does provide an alternate housing option, possibly at a more affordable price point for someone? I know Commissioner Raley suggested that the grad student looking for, maybe wants to live in your traditional single-family residential neighborhood, but only has a limited source of income, right, and can afford the rent on an accessory dwelling unit. So it truly can be an affordable housing option.
Awesome.
And brought up the City of Plano's ordinance. Theirs is unique in that there are many cities that allow for ADUs to be rented. It's not as common in the state of Texas. It's common primarily in the Northwest and the Northeast, and larger cities in Texas do allow them. Dallas is actually had been working on amending their accessory dwelling unit ordinance. And I believe in my quick research, there's kind of their amendment halted due to COVID, but I believe in certain areas of the city, they do allow for ADUs to be rented in certain overlays, I believe. And like I mentioned, City of Plano allows them to be rented. However, in order to ensure that the maintenance the maintenance of the property is upheld, and there's still some oversight from the property owner has to live on site, whether it's in the main structure or in the ADU.
Commissioner Petraza.
I have a few things. To further expand on the kind of rental issue, I did like the direction that Commissioner Raley was taking, that with the affordable housing, and I know that in Farmers Branch we've been looking for affordable housing for seniors, and so I think that this is sort of born from that idea in some ways. And you start thinking about the needs of seniors, and they're changing, right? So at one point you might want your mom to live in an accessory dwelling unit in your backyard, and then her situation changes and she needs more care, and so you've got to now put her into maybe a nursing home, or something else happens and your situation changes, and so then you've got this accessory dwelling unit. Well, what do you do with it at that point? You can't, does it become obsolete and it's just sort of gathering cobwebs? And so I think that the kind of long range need that we're addressing needs to be kind of more thought through, and that potentially if we have a need for affordable housing for also these 1 and 2 member families, does it behoove us to limit the rental of these types of structures to those people? Additionally, I think Commissioner Bertle mentioned that it's difficult to enforce some of these rules or codes, if you will. So your guest, who's your guest, and how do you really prove that they're your guest? And then even if they are your guest, they're now using your resources, so do you want to collect rent for their use but it's not rent? And so I think that it might be easier to just streamline it. Additionally, the duplex multifamily issue, I believe that anybody that has a single family dwelling, regardless of the zoning of their particular area, should be able to have one of these. Again, because we're looking at it from this perspective of who are you looking to house, and if it's these family members that need, to be close to you, and you have a single family home, I don't think it's a good idea. And duplex or multifamily areas, and so if we can explicitly prohibit it or require a special use permit in those applications, but leave it available only to single family homes, whether they're zoned in a multifamily, I'm fine with that. The square footage, I think 400 square feet, I know there's this trend of tiny homes, and those tend to start at about 100 square feet and max out at 500 square feet. And so we're sort of cutting that off. And the people that I have heard that are interested in these accessory dwelling structures, they're looking for granny pods, and they really, so bathroom and some running water, they want that out there, but they're not looking for a kitchen. They're really looking for a small home for their mother to live on, and they're looking at these tiny homes. In addition to kind of millennials are looking at tiny homes to live with their parents, and sort of so I don't know that 400 square feet is where we should land there, given these kind of trends and usage needs. And I think that's about it. I think the Plano ordinance saying that you have to live on premise is off-putting to me because, again, if your circumstances change and you are relocated to Chicago, but you don't want to sell your house in Farmers Branch, but you've got one of these, like, and I realize that wasn't written into anything that you guys put forth, but you did make note of that as a Plano component. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jones.
I think I agree with a lot of what has been said up to this point. Just to kind of put my thoughts out there, the first question I have is that we're bringing this issue up. Has there been a significant need, an outpouring from the community, or are we denying this? I mean, what's going on here? Is this a real issue, or is this just something that we're talking about because we got the time to fill on the agenda?
There have been specific circumstances where staff has had to deliver the bad news, I guess you can say, to property owners who want to either do an attached accessory dwelling unit or detached accessory dwelling unit for their ill mother or their child who may be impaired and may be somewhat independent but needs to have a relative nearby for care. And we've had to inform them that they're not located within an R1 or R2 zoning district. Therefore, the request for an SUP for an accessory dwelling unit cannot be made. As I showed on the map, R1 and R2 zoning districts are limited to generally 2 areas within the city, or limited areas within the city. So what's being proposed is to allow additional single-family districts the opportunity to construct an accessory dwelling unit.
Sure, I understand that. I was just wondering, is this like a once-a-year thing? Month or two thing? Or?
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that. I know we've had several occasions have to deny, if you will, a request for an ADU. I wouldn't say it's an abundance, but I know that it's come up several times.
Okay, and the reason I ask is to get a sense of how urgent this situation is, because my thought would be is, it sounds like we may need to go work on some of the MF and D zoning to make it so you can't do this or require a special use permit. And then there are just a whole bunch of pieces here. I'm wondering if maybe you could have a phased approach where we put it through the R's and then we move into this and that. And I'm just trying to get a sense of how urgent the situation is. So doesn't sound like it's on fire. So
I would say, Andy, if I could help address your question, no, it's not an issue that's on fire. I know it is something that council has requested that staff look into. Usually when ordinance amendments like this come about, sometimes we've had a specific use permit request for an accessory dwelling unit that is on the council's agenda. I know in the past, council has always been looking for ways to possibly streamline processes. I know we did a series of amendments where we removed specific use permits from items that could be regulated in other means. So we removed some of what I called superfluous SUPs. Since she worked on that, we also, we did an amendment probably a couple years ago with respect to accessory dwelling units that had the SUP requirement on them. Actually, I'm sorry, it wasn't the accessory dwelling units. It was certain accessory structures had a requirement for a specific use permit. And we amended that ordinance possibly 2 years ago. It was right when Shrupa joined us because she worked on removing the SUP requirement from those accessory structures, and we established some new provisions in place. So that was the first time this was addressed. But that's typically how sometimes these requests come about. There is the discussion from time to time about affordable housing. I know 2 years ago when we had the joint meeting with the Planning and Zoning Commission, and Andy, this predates you, but we had a joint meeting with the City Council and the Planning and Zoning Commission back in April of 2019 and had a conversation about affordable housing. What does that mean? Does the city have a role in addressing additional affordable housing? We have quite a bit of existing single-family residential housing stock that helps meet that need for affordable housing. So are there additional strategies that we need to employ? At that time, it was determined that accessory dwelling units might be an available option. And hence why I think Jennifer then did the follow-up work, and we approached this topic with council in March of 2020. There was interest in council to be able to allow for these and possibly streamlining the approval process, allowing for it in some other zoning districts. But I know council was very concerned about putting some controls in place on this, given some of the concerns that I know that Commissioner Bertle cited, particularly with the number of persons that might be living within an existing single-family home. I think there was also concern regarding your typical lawn shed structure that, you'd get the typical accessory building from Home Depot or wherever your favorite home improvement store is, and people might try and convert those into places of residence when they don't have running water, they're not on any sort of permanent foundation, they don't have toilets provided. So I know that's where I think some of the comments had come from. But there's no pressing dire need. I would say it seems like the requests come in cycles, though, with respect to inquiries, especially on family members being able to reside with an accessory dwelling unit, whether it is the aging parent or possibly a son or daughter that is that may have some sort of disability, but maybe is high functioning, and they want the ability for their child to be able to have some independence and be able to live on their own, but yet they still want to be in arm's reach, if you will, should some sort of need arise. So we see those inquiries from time to time, but they, like I said, they kind of come in cycles. We'll get 2 or 3 inquiries, and then we'll be quiet, and then we might get another inquiry, and then it's quiet, or we find some other alternate solution regarding with new home construction. How they might reconfigure the home to be able to accommodate the needs of all family members living in that residence, and still be in compliance with the ordinance. So we found some other workable solutions.
Perfect. Okay. Well then, judging by that this is indeed not on fire, I'd really appreciate, because I agree with Commissioner Bertle and Chairman Moore and Commissioner Zavala about the various concerns they've raised. This is a thorny issue that I think warrants a lot of study. The one thing I would also add is, as far as the 400 square foot situation, if you've ever been to IKEA, you've gone through the 325 square foot home. I would be interested to see what a cost per square foot would look like in maybe a representative sample, because then maybe we could balance the affordable housing and quality of life, because you may be able to put 185 square foot something or other in the backyard, but maybe it's a quality of life issue that we need to address there that we may not want to have in our community. So I would be interested to know what the market has to say about per square footage for these things, and then also I think I'm just comfortable with that 400 given what I've seen at IKEA. So those are all my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I move on to Commissioner Byrne, Director Fergens, it's 7:13, so we would have started our regular meeting at 7 o'clock. I just want to make sure that there's no one online. There's no one in the audience that showed up for the case that we thought was going to be up. Is there anyone online?
No, I do not see anybody right now.
Okay, super, great. Commissioner Byrne.
Yes, thank you. Generally, the concept, I agree, we need to either get ahead. If it's not an on-fire issue now for ADU requests, it's probably going to become that much more going in the future. So we probably need to right-size this as much as possible. So pretty much agree kind of with a lot of pretty much exactly what Bonnie said on the duplex and the multifamily, to the extent that there are single-family houses that have lots that are big enough to meet everything. I guess it depends if there's only 10 that could come up in the next, 4 or 5 years, then okay, maybe that's the SUP process. If there's a lot, then I don't think we need to disenfranchise those people and make it an overly burdensome process for them to do the same thing. Because, nobody buys houses based on what the zoning is. They buy a house based on what it is. So I think we need to be fair. If you've got a single family home, same lot that is just zoned different, you need to be able to pretty easily get that ADU as long as it fits all the other stuff, all the other requirements. I think I think the rental is going to happen no matter what. Just like Commissioner Morgan said, it's hard to enforce anyway. I think if it's there and it's allowed, and maybe we build some things in there, maybe not exactly like Plano, but there's the extra affidavit part. I don't know if that helps with enforcement down the road or whatever, but the rental is going to happen. I mean, the example I think that Bonnie uses, if you've got the aged parent that is in there, it's built for that, and then unfortunately that person moves on or passes on, you've got an empty ADU. That what are you going to do with it? And then there is a market out there for those folks. Like Commissioner Raley mentioned. So I think we need to allow for rentals for that. And then the square footage thing, I'd just be interested to see where 400 came from. If there's some scientific or some business data or whatever that comes through that quality of life, like Andy was saying, per square foot, if that's kind of the sweet spot, then okay, maybe that's the standard we go with. That's all I have.
Thank you. Commissioner Cole.
Really enjoyed and appreciated the robust conversation, as also not being someone that was here for the affordable housing conversation. Like everyone has mentioned tonight, I think there's a lot of research still to be done, but at the moment I would be in favor of the SUPs for multifamily and duplex just based off tonight's conversation. And then my other questions have all been answered. They were in regards to setback compliance and RVs, so I don't have anything additional.
Super.
I'm sorry, did you say there was a question about setbacks? I didn't quite.
No, my questions are going to be about setbacks, compliance, and RVs, but those have all been covered. Thanks for checking.
And Jennifer, just to add some levity, make sure that you include accessory dwelling units in your landscaping report as well. Just kidding. Any other comments, questions, thoughts about accessory dwelling units? Do you have everything you need?
I think so. I mean, I think there's not a descending vote, if you will, on the rental aspect of ADUs. I mean, I think that's something that could be explored further. We can provide additional information as far as where our zoning districts are located as it relates to one-family residential districts, and look into the square footage, the 400, and as it relates to quality of life, and if that's sufficient. We can look into the cost per square foot. I think that we can research and see what other communities or what builders are pricing that at. I think other than that, obviously there's a concern of enforcement for the occupancy or for the occupant of the ADU. And yeah, I think that's overall kind of the bring back more information regarding those items.
May I ask one additional question? In your research, I am interested in the additional off-street parking space. Again, just looking forward, if we have less auto dependency, or specifically in particular neighborhoods, that may be an additional restriction that may not be necessary if there is no car ownership by that additional occupant of that ADU.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much.
So I will just add, I mean, this doesn't have something to do with it, but there's a lot of tiny houses. If you've ever watched that show on television.
Yes, there are.
You see that a lot of people do build those in their backyard for a child or a young adult that they want to have independent in some way. So those can be built to that size. And then I'm still looking as far as affordable housing goes, and Tina and I work this, I'm still looking at the situation in McKinney and in Collin County where they do the containers and they build them into homes. They use 4 containers. Now it's taken them years to get it going, and we would have to do it through Dallas. But there are ways, I think, that Farmers Branch can, and I think this is a good start, continue to explore affordable housing, good affordable housing for residents.
All right. Moving on to item A5, review and discuss a multifamily development policy. Kira.
Hi. Just give me a second. All right, I'm ready. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Kira McCardle. I'm a consultant to the Planning Department. The purpose of this agenda item today is to have an initial discussion on a multifamily development policy that the Planning Department is beginning to work on. We'll start by providing a bit of background information on the policy, how it came about, where direction came from, and then talk about the role of the multifamily development policy, the goals we're hoping to reach, as well as the outcomes. And then I'd like to go through with the Commission a list of topics that we're looking at potentially including in the policy, and get your feedback on those topics. If there's a particular direction the Commission feels we should take with them, if there are certain topics they feel should not be included within the policy, or if there's something that the Commission feels that we've missed. So Council directed development of the multifamily development policy in September of 2017. They did this during a discussion, I believe, on multifamily development within the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It is and it has been a growing market within the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So this will no doubt also apply to Farmers Branch. And I think what we are looking to achieve is if this is a form of development, and we do have comprehensive plans that currently allow for the development within Farmers Branch, how can we best position ourselves as a city so that we are getting the end product that we want to see? Currently, the city gets its direction for multifamily development from its comprehensive plans. So this is sort of the East Side Plan, the Central Area Plan, the West Side Plan, and the I-35 Corridor Vision Study, which is going to go before Council in early February. And those plans provide quite high-level direction for the development of multifamily. So it might give direction, a general density that it wishes to see, as well as identify some general locations and characteristics of the multifamily development. Zoning regulations, either through the comprehensive zoning ordinance, or although none of the land uses within the CZO are of a high density multifamily development, or through planned development district, provide a more detailed information on multifamily development in relation to the site. So they talk about things like setbacks, a floor to area ratio, a maximum height, things of that nature. There's a lot in between those two levels of document that's sort of missing, and some of those intangible things that aren't discussed and aren't normally discussed within either a comprehensive plan or a zoning ordinance. So this policy would seek to sort of fill those gaps and provide some more information for developers on the other aspects of multifamily that we would like to see implemented in Farmers Branch. So the goal of the policy will be to provide guidance and set clear expectations, and to encourage high-quality multifamily development within Farmers Branch. And we would like to see this through the goal would be to see this through every stage of the process. So when a potential developer comes and calls Farmers Branch for their first call and expresses an interest in multifamily development, we will be able to point them in the direction of our comprehensive plans, but also in the direction of this policy. So even before they've made an application, they have an idea of what the city expects and would like to see in terms of multifamily development within the city. And then it also will make the process, once an application has been made, a lot more, hopefully a lot easier, but the conversations will become much more clear, because a bar will have been set, or a set of expectations will have been set. There will always be exceptions to the expectations that are set, but nonetheless there will have been an expectation set. So we would, as a planning department, expect that these guidelines are considered as an application's made. And once we are evaluating that application, we would evaluate that application against the guidelines and have a conversation with the developer to ensure that these guidelines were taken into account. And then moving on to the next stages of development, when a zoning application comes before the commission, you would be able to, as the commission, be able to compare that application to the guidelines, and so would council. So it would be able to be used at each stage of development. And as I said, the goal would be to create a very clear set of expectations and guidelines for those who are wishing to develop multifamily. And our hopeful outcome is that high-quality multifamily development will be what we see in Farmers Branch, and that we will see developers coming into the city and meeting the guidelines that we've set out. In terms of content, this is a list of content that we are, topics we're looking at addressing within the guidelines. From our discussion today, you will see a lot of them, none of them operate in a silo, a lot of them are intermingled. But these are topics that we would like to touch on. And also, as I said before, this is a policy, but it will be difficult to have to see a situation where there may not be exceptions to some of these, or where on a given site certain policies or parts of the policy may not apply. So to start, amenities. Amenities are facilities that increase a development's desirability for its residents. There are a number of ways that we could address amenities within a multifamily development guideline. We could specify amenities that we want to see within multifamily development. So we could say we would like every multifamily development to have a pool and a tennis court, whatever that may be. We could also take a couple of different approaches where we could say we would like to see 3 amenities, purpose-built amenities within a given development, or we may like to take an approach where we say we would like to see 10% of your property developed with amenities for the residents. Building design, this has a number of varied considerations in it. We could provide a lot of guidance to developers regarding building design. Scale, ensuring that the scale is correct for the surroundings. So this would take into account the current development that is around a development site, as well as the future developments that may occur on that site. So if a development site is currently located adjacent to a vacant lot, well, what does the comprehensive plan say will be built on that lot? If it is a multifamily lot that will be adjacent to single family, you may not want as dense a development. However, if its future zoning according to a comprehensive plan is mixed use or an office development, it may be appropriate to consider something much more dense in that location. Building articulation, what do we want the physical design of the building to look like in terms of changes of scale and height within the building to create interest. Ground floor entrances, if it's a strictly residential development, do we want to encourage developers to put ground floor entrances into the development so that it can activate the pedestrian atmosphere? And if blank walls being another one, how do we want to treat blank walls, and what direction would we like to provide there? If it's a blank wall on the street, we may want to request that the developer provide some interest either in the form of variation in material or pattern. However, if it's a blank wall adjacent to an alley, we may not be so concerned with what it looks like. And then lastly, a minimum % of windows on the ground floor. This would likely be most considered if we were in a mixed use scenario and we had commercial or something on the ground floor. What percentage would we like to see covered by glass so that it's activating the street and creating a more pedestrian friendly environment? Building materials, as many of you are aware, our influence, given the last state legislative session, we are no longer allowed to regulate building materials. So our influence in this area is limited. However, staff does feel that we are able to still provide guidance on this in this area. Staff is currently suggesting that we may want to look into requiring a change in materials so that the developer needs to use 2 or more materials in the construction of the building. Or have a change in color. We would need to work with our legal department to make sure that they are okay with whatever we put in regards to building materials, as we know that there is legislation around that. We know we aren't allowed to require, say, 25% masonry on a building and be that specific, but I think that staff feels that we can remain more general and high level and provide some guidance on what the city would really like to see. Density, so density is often, guidance on density is often provided within a comprehensive plan, and within a zoning regulation as well. A comprehensive plan would likely provide a high level range of a density, something similar to, just to throw a number out there, 30 to 40 units per acre, whereas a zoning ordinance or a zoning regulation would talk more about how that density is going to be expressed on a certain lot. One thing we want to be careful in developing these guidelines is we don't want to create conflict between plans. We don't want to say something, suggest a density that would be in conflict with what the East Side Plan recommends. So whatever density we do recommend will likely be quite broad and take those into consideration, but there is room to do that. And then there is also room for us to specify where we feel certain densities are more appropriate. So we could suggest that higher densities are more appropriate in mixed-use centers or along corridors that are more major corridors or areas where we see more mixed use and office development. And we might want to say if you're on a secondary or tertiary street and you're surrounded by single family residential development, that a lower density is more appropriate in that location. Landscaping, again, this is another place where landscaping minimums are specified in the comprehensive zoning ordinance. However, within multifamily, there is an opportunity to direct where landscaping is used. So for instance, the picture in front of you is landscaping is shielding or a parking garage. It can also be used to define private and public open space within a multifamily development, or it could be used to accentuate the entrance of a building. Those are a few examples. So we would be able within this policy to say, okay, you need to provide 5% landscaping, but we would like you to direct it to these locations. We can also encourage them the developer to include more landscaping to help mitigate some site constraints or design constraints on their site. Mixed use, mixed use is, I find sometimes a bit of a interesting topic. I love mixed use, but it's not appropriate everywhere. So providing direction on where it's appropriate is a very beneficial thing to do. Mixed use is great if it's all occupied and it's busy and it's creating life on the street. If you have a ground floor commercial space which is empty, that is not doing the community a lot, not giving a lot of benefit to the community. So we may want to direct where we feel mixed use is appropriate. So at high visibility locations within a mixed use center, such as the station area. And if a developer approaches us and wants to include it in other areas, that it may work great, but we might the city may choose to ask for a market study so that we know that there's a demonstrated demand for the use that they're wanting to include in there. Also, we could provide direction if it's a mixed-use building, whether horizontal or vertical, how we place the land uses. Often commercial and office are located on the lower floors, with residential higher up. As well as within a horizontal mixed-use scenario, we could direct where we would prefer to see certain uses. So put the commercial perhaps closer to the street and the residential towards the rear of the site. Parking, so again, we can direct the form of parking. I think the city does have a preference for structured parking lots. However, again, as I said, every site is different, so that may not always be feasible. So it may be beneficial for us to look at what our preference is in regard to both. The images that you see here, this is a structured parking lot, but as you can see, the developer on this plan has done a great job of placing residential development on the outside of the parking structure so that it's screened from view from the public street. And below is an example. It's you can't quite tell where the public road is, but I would say this would be an example of something we may not want to see in Farmers Branch. If the public road is out towards the edge of this image, they have placed a large amount of parking in between the public road and the entrance to the building, which is not normally desirable. And also, we could look at the amount of parking. So if there is a multifamily development that is located in proximity to transit, such as in the station area, or in other locations in Farmers Branch, we could encourage the developer to include less parking, so as to encourage people to use transit and to reduce development costs. We could also ask for the developer to provide a parking study for what they feel is necessary on the site. Public open space is land or an outdoor amenity that is put in place by the developer, but it's accessible to the general public. A couple good examples would be a pathway that might connect to streets or connect into a city pathway system, or a plaza that is provided at the entrance to a multifamily building. One good example that we have in Farmers Branch is at the Mustang Station development. I think between two phases of development, there is a walkway that connects the DART station to the restaurant park. So those are private spaces that the public can access. So those are, if a developer is willing to provide those, that provides great benefit to the community. And it can be a discussion usually at the time of development as to who will maintain the space and take ownership over time. Private open space is for the exclusive use of residents. Through this policy, we would be able to provide guidance on how much private open space we would like to see within multifamily development. This does relate back to the amenities that we discussed at the beginning of this presentation. So we could ask for private open space in the form of amenities. Another form of private open space is open space that is private to a dwelling unit. So that could be a balcony or a yardlet, so the small yards on the ground floor units. A few things we would want to keep in mind if we did want to look at providing guidance on units or balconies or yardlets is that we want to ensure that the amount of space we're requesting is actually usable space. So it needs to be something that the residents that are within it can actively use, rather than having a balcony that no one can really sit on, or a yard that can't really be used. I don't know. I know, it is very nice. Site design. So this is a very big topic that kind of ties everything together. So we can provide some guidance on site design to ensure that when the development is created, the developer is taking into consideration within the private space how different elements interact with each other. So we might want to look at where parking is in relation to the buildings, and also in relation to the amenities that are provided, but also in relation to where the garbage bins are and the utility meters are, and ensuring that everything is placed as well as it can be on the site. And then also outside of that, how the whole site interacts with the public realm. So where are the entrances to the parking garage, and what is the relationship of the buildings to the public street, to ensure that it's not only good for the residents, but the development design benefits the streetscape and the community as a whole. So that is the end of the topics that we have so far proposing to include within the policy. Again, if the commission has any feedback, the staff would welcome that. Once we obtain your feedback, staff will begin to draft the policy, and then we will bring it back to the commission prior to bringing it to you for your consideration. Thank you very much, and staff's available for questions.
Thanks, Kira. Can you remind us how many multifamily units we currently have in the city of Farmers Branch?
I can't. No, Tina might know.
I was just saying. You could have emailed us in advance, David. What I can tell you is on the west side, I know we have entitled over 8,000 units
Yes.
of multifamily alone.
Yes.
I know we have the numbers somewhere in our department as to what we've.
14,000 is the number I remember, because I remember the 8,000 on the west side, then we added some on the east side with the Jefferson, all the JPI things. And then existing, the last time I thought that you guys did an estimate count, it was between 13 and 14,000.
That probably sounds about right, because when you factor in all of the existing multifamily developments in the central area of the city, and as well as what we've entitled on the east side that's been constructed, that's probably about right. The number that always stands out to me is the one that we've entitled on the west side, just because not everything has been constructed yet. So, but we can also follow up and confirm that next time she brings us back.
The only reason I ask, I know, having sat here now for 5 years, I feel some of the pain that you guys go through. And I looked up schizophrenia in the dictionary because the definition is characterized by the coexistence of contradictory or incompatible elements. And to me, this topic is one of those. We'll go to a meeting and it will be no more multifamily, 0, I'll never approve another one. And then the right thing comes along and it's, oh my gosh, and then we start making 12 exceptions and all of a sudden the rules all change, which I think is probably why council's wanting a policy. That's my perception.
Yeah.
So to me, when I see this, and I'm excited about it, I'm glad about it, but to me, the goal is that we want to limit, we want to provide a framework, which you guys are calling policy, that limits or manages any new multifamily developments in our city. But it's a balancing act because on the one hand, we want it to be really strict and tough, and we want to raise the bar, and be like Highland Park or Frisco or whatever the latest, great city that is the last one we looked at. But on the other hand, if the right developer comes in and it's the right space and it's the right then, we'll jump at the right chance because it's in the station area or whatever it is. So with that, what I've learned sitting here is that really the only thing we as a city can control, and I'm kind of making some broad statements, but my perception is the only things we can control are the upgrades. We can put in place policies that require a developer to focus on upgraded things, like air-conditioned corridors was one of the things I remember they brought up. You have to have air-conditioned corridors, period, end of statement. Or I think, Kira, as you mentioned, structured parking. It has to be a parking garage. That's the beginning point. Or a pool. Because all of those things add such cost to the developer. The reason they're going with surface parking is because it's, 1/4 the cost. And then we've talked about permeable surfaces and bioswales and all of those things. So to me, we need to make a list of all those amenities over here and then almost kind of have a little game where we start playing with those things to decide what the balancing act is. Because obviously we could put too many of those things where no developer ever comes and looks at our city again. That's not what we want. I don't think that, even though sometimes we say we're never going to approve another one, we really honestly don't want to never have any more multifamily, I don't think. But we probably want to limit it and make it, not make it so easy so that a stock project just comes in and boom, there's 5,000 at the drop of a hat, just because there's a big empty parcel out there that's zoned that way and there's nothing we can do to stop it. So those are my thoughts about it. And then I guess the only last thing here is another part of the balancing act is the conversation about affordable housing, because once you start adding all those costs, then you've got the affordable housing thing over here on the other side, which is, does that mean it's less than housing? They don't get the pool, or no, they get the pool, but it's a reduced rent, or what is it? And so when we get on this topic, those are all the things I think of. Commissioner Zavala.
I was going to say, if I could interject again on you, sorry. David, you're right. The goal is that, yes, we recommended to council that we do the policy in identifying that which is most important to us, that we think that we should really push multifamily developers for having, because the policy also does give us the flexibility when that right project comes along, like you described. And another example, I know the mayor and I had gotten into a discussion one time regarding density, whether or not we should just amend all of our zoning districts to establish a minimum density requirement across the board. And technically, could we do that? Absolutely. But the moment we do that, we will have a project that comes in. Let's say we establish that minimum density of 40 units to the acre. We have a project that comes in at 38 units to the acre, but it otherwise meets all the spirit and intent of what we're trying to achieve with that development for that multifamily development. But if it didn't meet the 40, sorry, you can't do it. Or do we try to provide for some flexibility? So hence the policy route, because we think I've used something similar in another community that I've worked in that's been able to provide that additional direction. But my challenge to the commission would be to identify that which you believe is most important. And I would recommend that we focus our efforts there, because you're right. If we start getting the laundry list very long, then we are driving up costs of development. And then the list becomes longer in terms of what are the trade-offs. So I would encourage you to focus on that which is most important that you believe that we should regulate. We'll have to be careful regarding anything that affects, especially interior buildings. And I'll bring up I know you mentioned the air-conditioned quarters. I would like to talk with the attorneys about, do we have the ability to require that versus encouraging that? You're going to find in the policy that it's going to use words like encourage and should. There's likely going to be very little must and shall, because must and shall is typically what we put in ordinances, right? But it's, and that's where I go back to, again, defining what's most important. But anything that addresses the construction type of the building, or like I said, air-conditioned quarters, those are some things that we'll have to vet with the attorneys to see whether or not how much of a position that we can take to encourage that being provided. Because at the moment that we have someone come in and do a project like Mustang Station, if memory serves me correctly, does not have air-conditioned quarters. Right. So they're not climate controlled. But is that a bad project because it doesn't have the air-conditioned quarters? So as we work through this, I would encourage you to think about the other side. If you want to advocate for something, then think about what's the downside also to that being done, or have we had other projects that have been able to successfully be constructed but not have that requirement?
Can you remind us also? Sure. In the hierarchy of things, we've got the station area code, or whatever we're calling that district. Does that supersede whatever policy happens here?
Yes.
Okay.
So any existing zoning would supersede this policy. Where this policy will benefit us most is when folks come in and request to rezone property to allow for multifamily development. Anything that's currently entitled, that's currently zoned multifamily, then this policy will not be able to nearly as influence. And that's why in Kira's staff write-up, I know she had made note of influencing the detailed site plan. And I had her add the words where applicable, because there may be some instances where we might be able to offer some influence from that standpoint. But at the end of the day, if the site plan meets all the technical requirements of the zoning, then we're obligated to approve it, right? So that's why I say where this policy will influence us most is at such point in time when developers come in and request to rezone to allow for multifamily.
And
sorry. Go ahead.
If I could also add something I didn't mention in my presentation, and it speaks to sort of identifying priorities. Another thing that this policy can do, in addition to encouraging developers to do certain things, is, and I've seen this in a lot of examples that I've looked at, is we can identify things that we know expressly we do not want to see in Farmers Branch. So if it is a priority for the commission not to have swimming pools in any development, just to throw something out there, or not to have any landscaping go below 5% of the site, we can expressly say that we have things that we really do not want to see happen within multifamily development.
I think, I guess my final thought before I kick it over to Commissioner Zavala is, I think when we do this final recommendation to council, in my opinion, it would be helpful to have some of those disclaimers, like this is mainly applicable to rezone to allow that, what you just said. And remember, the hierarchy is that a current zoning such as the station area, supersedes this, because I think what happens is we think about the 14,000 units we have as though they're all one thing, and then how do we, manage that? And the reality is, this policy isn't going to manage that the way that maybe we think it is. Commissioner Zavala.
So I agree with a lot of what Chairman Moore said. I think it's great that you guys are looking at this from like a guidance. I heard guidance a lot from you during your presentation. I just want to make sure that it stays that way. I don't want to put something out there that's going to stymie creativity. I want to make sure that architects are able to create a vision of their own and present it to council. We're not the ones dictating like design criteria, or it needs to look like this, needs to look like that. I want to make sure that there's flexibility from the architects to create a vision of their own. Some of the things that I would like to see is I'm not a fan of surface parking at all. Like I think it's a waste of space in terms of land, which is finite. I think that structured parking, the wrapped example you provided was a really nice example. I think you can even look at different examples like Podium. I believe the developer that just came here that was presenting something over at Saltgrass is presenting a Podium style multifamily. I think that looked really sharp and really, really attractive. And I think that's the type of multifamily I'd like to see. I anticipate seeing multifamily as the station gets developed. I think that's an area that we just know needs more density in order for it to thrive. And hopefully the developer that comes in with some of these ideas that I'm sure council have shared with them and what they'd like to see, and hopefully they deliver a product that meets some of these pretty pictures you put up here for us. Something else that something else that I think you guys have brought up before, I don't know if it was Jennifer or you, Tina, that had brought up different, I guess, setbacks and where the properties are closer to the street. That to me just feels a little bit more walkable whenever when you create that kind of atmosphere and that environment. And with the street diet that I believe is coming, I think that's something that could definitely benefit the station area. And hopefully that's something that the developers or staff and council can communicate in terms of who's going to build the next phase of Mustang Station. Those are the type of things I look at. I think other than that, I think you guys are on the right path. I just want to make sure that we allow the private sector to still have their ability to create wonderful projects. I don't think anyone comes into an idea thinking, all right, we're going to not have X and Y amenities, because amenities are really what drives the demand for certain products. So they're going to want to make sure that they're delivering a high quality product so they can get those high dollar rents that they want. So, but I think this is a good idea in terms of what you guys are putting forth.
Thank you. Commissioner Brittle.
Yeah, well, ditto all that. So I agree. And I would love a huge amount of creativity for the architects to come up with something different. A question I have is, do we have a projection of how many units Farmers Branch needs or can sustain? And if we have 14,000, do we need 20? Do we need, is there a number that we shouldn't go over or we don't want to go under, or?
To my knowledge, we do not have anything that's been adopted for the community. Now, have there been some communities that have adopted some sort of standard of, like, for example, no more than a certain percentage of multifamily unit within their community? Yes. Some communities, though, have successfully not established a requirement. I would probably shy away from establishing a requirement such as that for our community. And the reason being is because of where we're located in the DFW area, being that we are a first ring suburb of a major metropolitan area. Our city is becoming more urban. If we are interested in having investment and redevelopment within our community, multifamily is going to have a role in that to some extent. I think we still need to balance being able to provide public services for the development that does happen. And I think our city has done a good job of being able to plan for that, especially when you think about the changes on our west side. And we know about the infill development that's happening on our east side. But it's, so like I said, I would recommend that we probably shy away from trying to establish some sort of maximum, because then it becomes, is that you could have a variety of different opinions as to whether or not that maximum number is appropriate. I think it's one of those things that we have to continue to evaluate and see what's appropriate for an area.
Yeah, well, I agree with all of that. I just wondered if there is a number that we do hit or not hit. So as far as, I agreed a lot with Gio. I do like the European feel. I do like the stuff closer to the street. And if you are in those kind of facilities, the guest parking is underneath in the parking garage. It's not out in the front and lined up in a tremendous amount. It still is. And that's then what you do plant and whatever out in the front or you redo, it is all very well done. And I am for having more amenities for the people that live there. And yes, that is what draws them in. That they do love the cabanas across the pool that they can really get in and invite, not just an open pool or whatever. So I think that there are things that we can request that are high quality, led to the high quality. I like that we're not forced to a number of density per acre or whatever, because what if we do want some very large luxury apartments somewhere? And I think this is also something that people want. So I think that we need to, this is a fabulous idea. So glad we're doing this. And I'm anxious to see then what we are going to put into the plan.
Commissioner Amanda.
I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt. I just want to chime in something to this. How many units in demand do we have? I guess one thing I see with like these multifamily apartments is you guys look at like what available housing is in Farmers Branch, for example. You've got, Linda, you're a realtor. I mean, maybe you retired recently, but you're a realtor. You can't find a house for like under 300 grand that's decent. That's going to have the amenities of multifamily.
Right.
So essentially, you know, I see a transition, a generational transition in terms of how people live. And I think that's something that we're going to have to accept.
Address, right.
As things move forward, because you're looking at younger generation that maybe they don't view home ownership the way some of us, like me. Like I mean, I own a home, but I probably wouldn't mind living in an apartment if it was nice. Don't tell my wife that, but
Or your 2 kids.
or my 2 kids. But I think that's something that we're going to have to look at as we move forward, because I think that's something that's real and it's happening, and it's not just in Dallas, but in all these metropolitan areas where you have these new graduates. They want to live close to the city, right? So where do you live close to the city? You start looking and you look at Uptown. I mean, it's like you can get a 1-bedroom there for like $1,800, $2,400 for like 700 square feet. So you start going out to the first ring suburb, like you said, and if you provide a quality product and you're next to a station and it's not that big of a deal to jump on a train and you're there. I mean, I think that's kind of what's happening with the multifamily market here in the metropolitan areas.
Commissioner Rayleigh.
Thank you. I'd certainly echo those sentiments. And I think in reading over the things, you've definitely provided a fantastic list. One of the questions I did have was about infrastructure, implications. And I'm sure that'll be addressed with any project ongoing, but it is something nagging at my mind with the increase of these multifamily. And by that, I mean, not only our streetscape and certainly the road diet and those things will help, but I'm thinking even, telecom, high-speed internet, et cetera, those sort of things wherein we can have those as amenities and consider them as utilities and amenities. In terms of the other elements here, the site design pieces and open space really spoke to me. If we are to retain our city and a park sort of nomenclature and spirit, I think that is one of the areas where we might end up focusing some of our work. I think the amenities will come. I'm less concerned about trying to dictate any of those. But in terms of it being sustainable, green, having the open space and the amenities and quality of life for the surrounding residents and citizens of the city.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Barrett.
I also echo the sentiments, and I would just be curious, and I know it was brought up in the beginning, so I'm probably just being repetitive at this point, but wanting to know what are the overlaps between our other existing plans that have to do with multifamily development, and then seeing if there's any gaps from there, and maybe that's the initial charge for figuring out what an overall policy should be. That's all I have.
Thank you. Commissioner Byrne.
I agree with everything that everybody has said. I guess process-wise, staff, do we need to do something like Chairman Norton? Chairman Moore is talking about? Do we kind of send you a list of this is what we prioritize, and then we kind of mix and match that, or are you guys going to take this back and say, okay, we've heard your comments, come back and present like, okay, hey, we've heard parking, we've heard amenities, we've heard landscaping, whatever that happens to be, and say this, and then also the gap analysis, what is there on other zoning that's not covered necessarily? Is that kind of the goal here, is to come back and solidify this so we can review it and then make tweaks to it before it goes to council?
Yes, exactly. So we will take the direction that you've provided to staff today. If you have additional comments that pop into your mind later on, you're always welcome to email us or phone and have a conversation. So we'll take the direction that we've gotten today. Then we will draft a policy, and we'll likely bring it back to you once for comment in the study session. Once we feel we're comfortable with the draft, the commission is comfortable with the draft, and we are as well, we'll bring it forward to the commission again for your recommendation. We may also, depending on how things develop, take it to council for a study session as well. Following your recommendation, we would take it forward to council for approval by resolution.
Commissioner Jones.
I agree with everything that's been said so far. The only thing I would add is that I think that, I don't know how you do this with a policy, but I would hope that we would focus on trying to develop a sense of community when we put in multifamily, especially when we're redeveloping and kind of moving forward into, a new generation of development, that we could create communities, that we could develop ways to drive commercial along with that community development, as opposed to isolated pockets of multifamily and kind of hoping that things come. So that it's a half-baked thought, but I just think about this, and when we're looking at like along LBJ, and you could very easily see that go from to commercial, and then maybe have a one-off residential, one-off multifamily that doesn't really have the community character of our city in a park. So however we keep that in our mind, developing a sense of community, I think that'd be important. But I agree with the rest of the commissioners as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Petraza.
I just want to reiterate a lot of the things that have already been said and make sure that we are maintaining some flexibility, especially when we're looking at unique areas in like the east side, when we're looking at this infill and redevelopment of warehouse sites, and realizing that it's going to be difficult to predict the nuances there. I also want to make sure we are not precluding like this affordable housing in entirety without ginormous subsidies, which I don't know that that's possible in the kind of real estate climate that we're in now, but in an idealistic way, I'd like to kind of preserve the ability to do that. Personally, I also agree with the open space public, that segue, the trail system, and it segues into a lot of the ethos behind a lot of what the city's been doing for many years now. Site design and parking, I think that they kind of go hand in hand with creating that that feel that we're looking for without really, and the density without really too tightly binding these developers into other parameters. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you.
David, if I could request a clarification from Commissioner Petraza.
Sure.
Ms. Petraza, could you please readdress your point regarding you are wanting to allow the opportunity for affordable housing or affordable units or not? I didn't quite follow you on that.
Yes, I do. I want to make sure that we're not putting in such demanding amenities that would then preclude affordable housing without substantial subsidies. So I want to make sure we leave that as an option. I don't know that it's realistic in our real estate climate right now, but in my idealistic way, I would like to try to make that an option at some point.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Brittle.
We could have a tiny home community. I mean, truthfully, think about it. You can get a bunch of those little places on one thing. Anyway, I like that idea. A tiny home community.
Those exist?
Any other comments, commissioners?
Exception, it's not a lot of tax revenue for the city. Just throw that out there. Not a high yielding tax revenue idea for the city.
So do you have what you need from us?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much,
Super.
commissioners.
Item A6, receive a report regarding zoning and development cases acted upon by City Council. Director Fergens.
Thank you. Tina Fergens, Director of Planning. So I hope the list is fairly self-explanatory, but there were a couple of items that I wanted to review with the commission because you'll see some that I included on here that were not necessarily case-specific, but I figured you would have questions regarding them since they are development-related. And so that is with respect to I'm going to skip the Mercer Crossing Boardwalk track for just a moment on the split vote because I'm going to ask Jennifer's assistance on that one just a moment. Someone heard to be thinking about why the split vote took place. One thing comes to mind, but I know there was a second one that I'm drawing a blank on, so we'll come back to that. The couple things I wanted to address were landscaping. So I know you all have done a substantial amount of work on helping us formulate a landscape ordinance to bring forth for council's consideration. Jennifer gave an initial presentation back in December. I know Chairman Moore was there, and the council really struggled with tree preservation requirements for single-family residential. They were also wanting to understand what are the residential landscaping requirements that we might be proposing. So basically, that discussion got tabled until when we do our joint meeting in April. So we will be having a follow-up conversation with City Council at our joint meeting, and I have a feeling the landscape discussion will be the bulk of that discussion. Did you have a question?
What was the problem that they had with the residential?
Well, specifically, so keep in mind, the way we divide it up, as you're well aware of, the landscaping and tree preservation ordinance work that we've been doing was substantial in a major project. So we were dividing that up into two presentation efforts to help council out. So the first effort was the tree preservation, and then the second presentation we were going to come back with was with respect to the landscape requirements. And so we got through the presentation on preservation first, but the big concern was preservation requirements for single-family residential properties and whether or not that's an additional burden on property owners, an additional cost. I think there were some concerns regarding the permitting aspect, having to do a tree survey, and I think understanding some of the additional requirements associated with the ordinance. So, and keep in mind, since we did not present then the single-family residential landscape requirements that would be in place for new construction, they were wanting to see that other side of the story as well. So we did not focus on anything really in our conversation on tree preservation for commercial development and multifamily development. So at the end of our conversation, I did ask them, be thinking about whether or not we need to have tree preservation for the commercial development and the multifamily, because staff finds itself in a negotiation position with developers, being that we do not have the ordinance support there. And when I left with that thought, I could see a couple of them, they just sort of paused and was kind of like, okay, yeah. But I asked them, I don't need an answer right now. Be thinking about that for when we come back and have this conversation, because we never really got to that point in the discussion. So much of it was focused on the single family residential. And we shared with them that, you all deliberated this extensively in terms of the requirements that were being proposed. So I think this, you all have had multiple conversations regarding tree preservation and then the landscaping requirements. This was the first time City Council had received it. So to their benefit, they were not, they were getting hit cold with this. We had information, staff write-up as part of the materials that we gave them. But I think as you probably learned from that exercise and that journey that we went on, is that it takes multiple conversations to understand how the requirements all work together and come into play.
Tina, could you have staff send a link to that council meeting to everyone? I would just encourage everyone. I know everyone can look it up, but so that you don't have to search. I think it would be worth everyone's time just to watch that segment. I don't remember it being longer than 30 minutes. What's interesting is the exact same process that we went through, as Director Fergens is saying, that took us maybe 5 meetings of discussion. They were asking the exact same questions, but they were hit with it and they only had 30 minutes to think about it. So part of it was there wasn't enough. Part of it was, like she said, it wasn't all it wasn't a complete presentation. Part of it was they didn't have a lot of time. And so the same way that we initially said, wait, this feels like an additional tax, it's burdensome, wait, those were the same reactions, but I think it would be worthwhile for everyone to watch that so that by the time we get to the April meeting, you will be able to know going in, and you won't be blindsided,
I would agree.
By whatever questions may come up. There was a little bit of, I got the sense that we, and I'll include the planning department with the Planning and Zoning Commission, that we were creating a problem that didn't exist. And if you watch council meetings often, sometimes that's the backup. Excuse number 4, and I say that with the utmost respect, but excuse number 4 is, are we creating a problem that, in fact, someone said it, I think Andy Jones said it on this meeting, are we addressing something that doesn't exist? Right. That's always a great one to throw out. And so it was interesting because, again, since we had been talking about this over a year, they said, and what's interesting is 2 of our fellow commissioners who are now on the council, in fact, sat through some meetings of this, but they didn't sit through the entire amount, and they didn't remember even all the things that we had all discussed. And so it was just an interesting meeting that I think it would be worthwhile for everyone to watch.
I would agree. Excellent suggestion. So, and if anything, just gives a refresher going in as we prepare for that meeting. So. The very last item on this list is with respect to the Mercer Crossing Amphitheater tract and specifically the development agreement. So as some of you are very well aware of, in fact, actually Amber's probably the newest to the group, obviously, but I believe the rest of you all were here this past summer as part of the commission. We had done some various amendments to Plan Development District 99. There are some contractual obligations associated with the developers agreement that's between the city of Farmers Branch and the developer. So the development agreement that was negotiated also provides some of the foundation and groundwork that's included in the zoning. Tonight, we were actually anticipating, we thought we were going to have a zoning case on your agenda. The applicant has subsequently requested suspension of that zoning case, and I'm anticipating a withdrawal letter from them as a result of direction that council had given us as recent as this past Tuesday as it relates to the amphitheater tract. There has been increasing neighborhood opposition regarding the development of the property with the amphitheater, and council had received numerous emails from residents on the west side that prompted the request of council to have a discussion with respect to the development agreement obligations. Council gave staff the direction, and the applicant too for that matter, to move forward with amending that development agreement to allow for single family attached uses on the amphitheater tract. If you recall, that amphitheater tract is roughly an 8.7 acre property. It's on the south side of Whittington, the north side of the lake that's north of LBJ, and then it's just east of Chartwell Crest. So we will be working on an amendment to the development agreement. In all likelihood, we'll work on that first because of some of the other components associated that impact the public improvement district that exists over there on the west side. And then we'll be bringing forth the zoning application in working with the developer. I would anticipate that we will rezone that property to a new planned development district. I'm just looking through it's just some of the initial conversations Jennifer and I have had and with the applicant, but that has been put on pause for the time being, so we can go through some additional steps with respect to the development agreement, but also giving the developer an opportunity to come up with a layout associated with that property. So that is that's part of the reason why that case ended up not being on your meeting agenda this evening from that perspective.
Tina,
Yes,
I watched that meeting and I left with lots of questions, but one of the questions was, is the plan to actually do another amendment to that agreement, or is the plan to throw that agreement away and start over? I was confused.
It will be an amendment to that agreement. So much of the agreement will remain intact as was negotiated from this summer, or I say this summer, but the summer of 2020. But the development agreement has to be amended to remove the obligation for the construction of the amphitheater on that property. We may also have to amend Plan Development District 99. I want to have a subsequent conversation with the attorney. There's some language in there that may result where we do not have to actually amend PD 99. The uniqueness of this property is that it's currently zoned Plan Development District 88. So it's not it's not included in the land area of PD 99, but there were provisions including it in PD 99 that addressed the construction of the amphitheater in helping make a connection back to the development agreement. So hence our suggestion in conversations with staff and the applicant about probably rezoning this property to its own planned development district. The developer anticipates doing a similar type single-family attached product that will be comparable to what was being done in planned development district 100. I know I'm throwing all these numbers out, but on the north side of Whittington, we talked about whether or not we could just expand that planned development district to pick up this property. Normally, I would say that would be a good idea, but in this case, given all the documents that are attached and the exhibits that would have to be amended, and we know there are some of the development provisions in PD 100 that from an implementation standpoint we had some challenges with, so we do not want to repeat those same challenges for single family attached development on this property. In particular, the landscaping. The landscaping requirements in PD 100 were very extensive, but I think when the ordinance was written, we forgot to take into consideration things like where the water line would be located, how that conflicts with parkway trees, and then also the fact that the front yards are very, very small and so may not be able to accommodate all of the shade trees that are required to be planted. So we had worked with the developer in some of the creativeness of the aspect of implementation that still is in keeping with components of the code. So I would anticipate that we'll work on getting the development agreement accomplished first. And as you know, the development agreement does not come before the Planning and Zoning Commission. That's something that's negotiated directly with City Council. But there is a zoning process that we will eventually be going through. Council did also ask us to notify everyone within the neighborhood. There was a geographical reference of south of Valley View, but I didn't catch if it was just west of Luna or on both sides of Luna. Depending upon the process for the zoning, if we end up having to amend Planned Development District 99, we may be notifying everybody within that zoning district anyway. So, but the council was very concerned about making sure that the residents that live on the west side do receive some sort of notification from the city to let them know that this zoning amendment would be moving forward. So there's several logistics things that we have to coordinate internally amongst staff, but I know this development agreement does have and influences what also transpires related to the zoning process. So any questions about that particular item? And no, I don't have a time frame if that's what you're asking.
Can I just quickly ask Andy, since you live out there, Andy, how do you feel about them getting rid of the amphitheater?
So there is a great deal of resistance to some of the stuff that was. So our community believed that it was going to be an amphitheater, and then there was mention of an office building and a helipad. And so the community got up in arms about that issue. I mean, I do aviation law. I do not want a flying gas station behind my mailbox because that's where it would go. And then the concern about, well, there's an office building that decreases the community value. And then it went on to the amphitheater. Personally, for me, I would prefer seeing single family detached as opposed to single family attached. The amphitheater kind of goes against the spirit of community around here because you have all these single family homes and then there are architectural drawings that show this is going to be like a Grecian thing. Okay, that's fine. And then there are other architectural drawings that suggest it's going to be like a mini Toyota music factory. Well, if it's like the Toyota music factory, I'm going to have a problem with that, putting a mini Toyota music factory behind my mailbox where my kids play. And so I think that there's a lot of resistance to the community to this. Personally, for me, I would be against it, but I think the community also feels that they're kind of held hostage between the developer and the city because you have to give the developer what they want to make some money, so you can't ask for too much. But then again, if you do ask for too much, she says, "Fine, I'll just build a helipad," and you know. Well, you see the tension there between the people who live here, the community, and the city. I would not be in favor of a mini Toyota music factory. So I think if we're going to go with detached single family houses, even if they are attached, I think that's the best of all possible worlds, as Candide would say.
The other thing I'll add is, so the office building is not a requirement of the development agreement. If you recall, the developer was going to construct a 40,000 square foot office building on that property. And then the helipad came about as a result of a collection of both of those amenities being added. They were wanting to amend the zoning to allow for that. But again, we should be receiving a letter of withdrawal from the applicant with respect to that zoning case, since we're going to be moving forward with the amendment to the development agreement. So other items I would like to think are that you would recognize since they were recently considered by the commission, back to the boardwalk track. So this was an interesting discussion, but part of it also, when it went to council, it was advertised and posted for not just a discussion of the site plan, but also the development performance obligations, because the council was wanting to have a discussion related to that. So I think there was some, as it relates to the boardwalk site plan itself, I believe there was some concern regarding the fact that the property was only going to have one point of access from LBJ instead of having two. The original site plan, if you recall, provided for 2 points access, 2 drive approaches. But after the applicant further evaluated this site, they realized they were going to run into some challenges, particularly from a cost standpoint, with widening the bridge to accommodate a decel lane for their westernmost drive approach. So they funneled it down to 1 drive approach. I think there was concern regarding whether or not 1 drive was sufficient in order to be able to address emergency access needs, of which, our fire department is part of our review, and they were comfortable with the design as shown. There will eventually be a second point of access into the boardwalk track at such point in time when the multifamily site develops, and we know that because of the fact that it's already entitled for 500 units of multifamily, and we're trying to work the fire lane and access system so that it provides for that additional point of access that could provide service to the rest of the retail restaurant development. But Jennifer, I was thinking that there was one more item that was a potential cause of concern, or did I not think back correctly?
The majority of the discussion and the concern lied on the driveway access. The other kind of a concern was the parking. There was a special exception of the parking and then potential need for a parking study in the future once, if the developer decides to build on that pad site they have. But I think the biggest hangup was the access, the one access to the
Right.
to the site.
So, any questions regarding the boardwalk site plan? Okay, and the other items, again, I'm more than happy to address them unless you've got individual questions. So I'll leave it at that and allow you to ask questions if there's a project of interest.
Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Brittle.
Well, John may want to bring us up to date as to what's going in right beside Walmart and right in front of the Baylor, whatever it is.
The Baylor Scott and White. So what
Baylor
that
Scott
would have been, so if you recall, gosh, the commission did a site plan amendment for that tract for a multi-tenant building. I'm looking at Jennifer because I know she worked on it. So I'll let you chime in on what all that is.
Yeah,
So Tina's correct. We did a site plan amendment for that front portion in front of the city clinic for a retail shopping center and a standalone school. So so that's what you're seeing that's under construction is the school, which is the larger building, and then on the north side of the site there's a shopping center. I believe they currently have a dentist, a bank, and a restaurant going into those spaces. Is it just three tenant spaces? So okay, so those tenant spaces are.
You know what kind of school?
It is a, I believe it's up to 5th grade, if I'm not mistaken. I cannot recall the name of the school. I know they have a similar school in Capel, McKinney. I think Irving has one, Highland Village. So it's a
daycare and after school program.
Yes.
and I can see their project in McKinney because I drove by it, but it had the block letters and but it was predominantly childcare with an after school care program.
Well, they had a lease originally, they pulled out, but they're required to provide a restaurant. They're talking to a new concept now about that. That's part of that. That was part of their SUP.
Any other questions about cases acted upon by City Council? Seeing none, item A7, thank you, Director Fergens. Item A7, discuss agenda items for future planning and zoning commission consideration. Be careful what you ask for.
Well, and I actually have one for you all. But this is an easy one. So I just wanted to give the commission a heads up of a future item. It's not on the commission's agenda, but it is on city council's agenda for February 2nd. Should you all be available to attend, I would invite you. The planning department is receiving from the Texas chapter of the American Planning Association the Certificate of Achievement for Planning Excellence, and this is for the year 2020. You all are part of our efforts of being successful, so I would encourage you, if you have the opportunity to come to the council meeting, or at least tune in if you have other obligations. The mayor will be presenting the Certificate of Excellence to our team, so thank you.
Is that 6 o'clock?
At 6 o'clock meeting, February 2nd.
All right, any other items of business? Seeing none, I will close the study session at 8:24 p.m. Thank you all.